What you are about to hear is not fiction. This is not a movie trailer. This is the real world, right now, today, March 7th, 2026. And the President of the United States has just told an entire nation of 87 million people that there will be no deal, no negotiations, no off-ramp, and no diplomacy unless Iran gives up everything. He used two words that haven't been used by an American president since World War II. Two words that changed the entire trajectory of this war, sent oil prices above $91 a barrel, triggered a secret Russian intelligence operation, and left the entire global economy holding its breath. Those two words? Unconditional surrender. Stay with us, because what happened in the last 24 hours will change the world. It started written with a post. 4 words, written in all capital letters, posted on a social media platform by the most powerful man on earth, at a moment when the entire Middle East was on fire, when oil tankers were rerouting around the entire continent of Africa to avoid Iranian missiles, when 6 American soldiers lay dead in the desert of Kuwait, when the world's most important shipping route was effectively shut down, when gold had broken records, when flights across the Gulf had been grounded for days, and when a brand new war, the biggest American military engagement since Iraq, had just entered its 7th day with no end in sight. President Donald J. Trump logged onto Truth Social on the morning of Friday, March 6, 2026, and typed what may become the defining statement of this entire conflict. There will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. And just like that, the entire diplomatic landscape of the Middle East shattered into pieces. To understand why those 4 words matter so profoundly, why analysts, economists, foreign ministers, generals, and world leaders stopped everything they were doing to read and reread that sentence, you have to understand everything that led to this moment. You have to go back 1 week. You have to go back to the night of February 28th, 2026, when at 1:15 in the morning Eastern Time, the United States of America and the State of Israel launched the most sweeping, the most sophisticated, and the most consequential joint military operation since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. The operation had a name that sounded like it was ripped from a summer blockbuster. They called it Operation Epic Fury. And in the first 24 hours alone, American B-2 stealth bombers, F-35 stealth fighters, reconnaissance aircraft, cruise missiles, and naval assets struck more than 1,000 targets inside Iran. 1,000 in one day. Aerospace forces, joint headquarters facilities of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iranian ships and submarines, anti-ship and ballistic missile sites, command and control centers, military communications capabilities, air defense systems. All of it was targeted simultaneously in a breathtaking display of American military power that stunned even seasoned defense analysts who had spent careers wargaming scenarios exactly like this one. But the strike that changed everything, the strike that took this conflict from a military operation to something far more seismic, was the one that killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Iran's supreme leader, the man who had wielded absolute power over the Islamic Republic for more than 3 decades, was assassinated in the early hours of the American-Israeli offensive. Iranian state media confirmed his death on the morning of March 1st. The Fars news agency, controlled by the IRGC, reported that Khamenei's daughter, son-in-law, grandchild, and daughter-in-law had also been killed in the strikes. Iran declared 40 days of mourning, and in that single moment, the entire geopolitical order of the Middle East, an order that had been defined for 35 years by the iron grip of the supreme leader, was gone. The question that immediately consumed every intelligence agency, every foreign ministry, and every think tank on the planet was the same. What happens now? What happened in the days that followed was war. Real war. Escalating war. The kind of war that disrupts everything. Global energy markets, international aviation, shipping routes, stock markets, oil prices, diplomatic alliances. All of it. Within days of the initial strikes, Brent crude oil prices had surged more than 24%. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway off Iran's southern coast, through which approximately 20% of the world's entire oil supply flows every single day, was effectively closed. Iran's Revolutionary Guard threatened to attack any ship passing through the route. Major shipping companies, including Maersk and MSC, announced they were suspending all vessel transit through the Middle East until further notice. Ships were being rerouted around the entire continent of Africa, adding days and significant cost to every cargo shipment. Over 1,500 flights were canceled in the region. More than 19,000 flights were delayed globally, according to the flight tracking service FlightAware. Dubai International Airport, one of the busiest in the world, faced near shutdown conditions as Iranian missiles were intercepted over the Emirates. 2 blasts were heard in Dubai, one in Manama, Bahrain. Saudi Arabia intercepted 3 drones east of Riyadh and 3 ballistic missiles targeting a military base south of the capital. By day 7, March 6th, the scale of the military operation was staggering. According to official data released by United States Central Command on Friday, American and Israeli forces had hit more than 3,000 targets inside Iran during the first week of Operation Epic Fury. 43 Iranian ships had been damaged or destroyed. Satellite imagery from providers like Planet and Vantor showed multiple fires, sunken vessels, and destroyed buildings at Iranian naval bases, including Konarak and Bandar Abbas. CENTCOM posted that it had destroyed all 11 of Iran's ships in the Gulf of Oman. Iranian missile attacks against American and Israeli positions had fallen 90% compared to the first day of the war. According to American and Israeli officials, 60% of Iran's missile launchers and stockpiles had been destroyed. The admiral commanding United States Central Command, Brad Cooper, confirmed those figures. 6 American soldiers from the 103rd Sustainment Command, U.S. Army Reserves out of Des Moines, Iowa, had been killed by an Iranian drone strike in Kuwait on March 1st. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Air Force General Dan Kane, honored them by name on X, formerly Twitter. Major Jeffrey R. O'Brien, Captain Cody A. Cork, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Robert M. Marzan, Sergeant First Class Nicole M. Amor, Sergeant First Class Noah L. Tietjens, and Sergeant Declan J. Cody. 6 Americans, 6 families, 6 lives, gone. And yet, even as all of this was unfolding, even as Tehran was being struck by waves of Israeli Air Force fighter jets, even as Lebanon was being warned to evacuate entire neighborhoods in Beirut's southern suburbs, even as Iran's proxy forces in Iraq launched over 23 drone strikes on American assets in Erbil, even as Iran launched fresh salvos of missiles at Israel, the Iranian government was signaling, quietly, that it was open to diplomacy. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said publicly that some countries were engaging in mediation efforts to end the war. He said Iran was committed to peace in the region, but prepared to defend itself. He said, and this is a crucial detail, that any mediation should address those who, in his words, underestimated the Iranian people and ignited this conflict. The implication was clear. Iran wanted a way out. Iran wanted talks. Iran was, at least publicly and through back channels, reaching for an off-ramp. And then Trump posted, "There will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender." Just like that, in all capital letters on Truth Social, the off-ramp was gone. The President of the United States, on the same morning that Iran's president was talking about mediation and diplomacy, slammed the door, bolted it, and threw away the key. He didn't just reject talks. He didn't just say the timing was wrong, or that conditions needed to be met first, or that Iran needed to come to the table with good faith. He used language that hadn't been used in American foreign policy since the Second World War. Unconditional surrender. the phrase that defined the Allied demand on Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. The phrase that left no ambiguity, no gray area, no room for interpretation. You either surrender everything or the war continues. The immediate question from every analyst, every journalist, every foreign ministry, and every market trader was, what does that actually mean? What does unconditional surrender look like for a nation of 87 million people? Trump clarified in a phone interview with Axios just hours after his post. He said, unconditional surrender could be that they announce it, but it could also be when they can't fight any longer because they don't have anyone or anything to fight with. Read that again slowly. He wasn't just talking about a formal surrender ceremony. He was describing the complete military destruction of the Iranian state's ability to wage war. The annihilation of its military capability to a point where there is no one left and nothing left to fight with. That is not a negotiating position. That is a war aim, and it is a maximalist one. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt went on Fox News and spelled it out even more specifically. She listed the United States' military objectives in this conflict: destroying Iran's navy, eliminating its ballistic missile threat, ensuring Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon, and weakening its regional proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. She said that when Trump determines Iran no longer poses a threat to the United States and the goals of Operation Epic Fury have been fully realized, then Iran will essentially be in a state of unconditional surrender, whether Iran formally announces it or not. The United States, Leavitt made clear, reserved the right to unilaterally decide when that moment had arrived. Secretary of State Marco Rubio had already been on the phone with Arab foreign ministers in the region, telling them the war was expected to last several more weeks. He said the current military focus was on Iran's missile launchers, stockpiles, and factories. He told the ministers that the American goal was not regime change, while simultaneously making clear that Washington wanted different people running Iran. That tension between the stated position of not seeking regime change and the very obvious reality that the entire war's objective appeared to be exactly that was not lost on anyone. Danny Citrinowicz, an Iran expert at Israel's Institute for National Security Studies and the Atlantic Council, put it plainly when he said that if unconditional surrender is the official U.S. position, and given the fact that the current Iranian regime will not surrender, then the campaign will have to continue until the collapse of the current regime. He said anything short of that would effectively be considered a failure, regardless of all the operational military successes of the campaign. Trump's Truth Social post had one more paragraph that the world couldn't quite believe it was reading. He wrote, and we are not paraphrasing, this is what the President of the United States actually wrote, "Iran will have a great future. Make Iran great again. MIGA." He pledged that after Iran's unconditional surrender, the United States and its allies and partners would work tirelessly to bring Iran back from the brink of destruction, making it economically bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. He said a great and acceptable leader or leaders would be selected after the surrender. He had already told CNN's Dana Bash on Thursday that he was not concerned whether Iran became a democratic state. He was looking for leadership that was favorable to the United States and its allies. He had said he wanted to be involved in choosing the successor to Supreme Leader Khamenei. He had compared the situation to Venezuela, where he said things had worked out, quote, easily after the political transformation there. The implications were breathtaking. The President of the United States was openly planning to have a hand in selecting the next leader of a country of 87 million people in the middle of a war he had ordered. Meanwhile, the war was expanding, not contracting. On Friday, March 6th, Israeli Air Force fighter jets, approximately 50 of them, guided by precise IDF intelligence, struck a heavily fortified bunker beneath the late Supreme Leader Khamenei's compound in Tehran. The IDF described this bunker as his emergency command center, spanning multiple streets in the heart of the Iranian capital and containing numerous entrances and meeting rooms for senior members of what the IDF called the Iranian terrorist regime. The IDF shared video of the operation from several angles. The Israeli military chief had already announced Wednesday that Israel was moving to what it called the next phase of the war. Israel had by that point carried out 2,500 strikes with more than 6,000 weapons deployed. In Lebanon, Israeli strikes battered Beirut's southern suburbs, and the United Nations Rights Office spokeswoman, Ravina Shamdasani, warned that hundreds of thousands of people had been affected by Israeli displacement orders, saying the orders risked amounting to what she called prohibited forced displacement under international law. Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam warned that a humanitarian disaster was looming. Iranians in Tehran, waving clenched fists and Iranian flags and holding images of the late Supreme Leader Khamenei, marched after Friday prayers, chanting, "We'll fight, we'll die, we won't accept humiliation," and "No compromise, no surrender, destruction of Israel." One demonstrator, Hassan Fatallahi, age 54, told the Associated Press that he had brought his own children to the demonstration to make Iran's enemies understand that Iranians would sacrifice their lives for the Islamic Revolution. Then came the Russia revelation, perhaps the most alarming new development of Day 7. CBS News reported, citing an intelligence source and a senior U.S. official with direct knowledge, that Russia had been providing Iran with intelligence about the locations and movements of American troops, ships, and aircraft in the region. This was the first concrete indication that Moscow had sought to get directly involved in the war. CNN confirmed the same reporting through multiple sources. The Kremlin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, confirmed only that Russia's government was in dialogue with Iran's leadership and would continue that dialogue. On Friday, Iranian President Pezeshkian and Russian President Vladimir Putin held a direct phone call and agreed, according to Russian state news agency TASS, citing the Kremlin, to continue contacts. The geopolitical implications of Russia feeding American military location data to an adversary actively fighting U.S. forces were staggering. It represented a direct Russian intervention in the conflict, not with troops or weapons, but with intelligence. And it escalated the potential for direct American casualties in a way that no statement from Moscow could obscure. A dozen Senate Democrats immediately criticized Trump for simultaneously waiving sanctions to allow India to purchase Russian oil more easily, calling it a free pass for Putin at precisely the moment Russia was working against American military operations. The economic impact of all this was being felt everywhere. Brent crude oil prices, the global benchmark, had surged 31% since the start of the conflict, reaching $91 a barrel, the highest level since October 2023. Qatar's energy minister, Saad Al-Kaabi, issued a stark warning on Friday that rising oil prices due to the war against Iran, in his words, could bring down the economies of the world. That was not hyperbole from a small nation's politician. Qatar is one of the world's largest producers and exporters of liquefied natural gas, and its energy minister was telling the global community that the trajectory of oil prices posed an existential risk to the global economy. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway that Iran controls and which handles approximately 20% of global oil and LNG shipments, was effectively closed. Analysts at Rystad Energy forecasted that prices could reach $100 a barrel or beyond if disruptions persisted, with Goldman Sachs' head of oil research, Dan Stuyven, explaining that the market's current pricing around $90 reflected traders betting on a roughly 4-week disruption. Goldman Sachs estimated the fair value of Brent crude at $65 per barrel under normal conditions, meaning the market was pricing in a $26 war premium based on expected disruption duration. If the war lasted longer than 4 weeks, those prices would go significantly higher. The Penn-Wharton budget model put the potential damage to the United States economy alone at up to $210 billion, depending on how long the conflict lasted and how severely energy markets were disrupted. European natural gas prices had nearly doubled after Iranian attacks on Qatari LNG facilities caused Qatar to temporarily shut down its LNG plants. The EU gas price decreased somewhat by midweek, but remained at elevated levels. The Dow Jones Industrial Average had fallen more than 400 points in the first trading session after the war began. Defense stocks surged, Lockheed Martin gained 6%, Northrop Grumman up 5%, drone maker AeroVironment up more than 10%. Oil stocks surged. ExxonMobil and Chevron gained around 4%. ConocoPhillips gained more than 5%. Shipping companies, including Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd, announced suspension of Middle East operations. Over 1,500 flights had been canceled in the region. Gold rose nearly 2% above $5,360. The global travel industry, valued at approximately $11.7 trillion, was facing severe disruption as airspace closures, Iranian missile threats, and passenger fear combined to ground flights across the entire Gulf region. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, had passed through the Suez Canal on March 5th, moving from a position where it was helping defend against Iranian ballistic missile threats to Israel toward the Red Sea, where it could be positioned to defend against any potential Houthi entry into the conflict. The 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg in North Carolina had its major training exercise abruptly canceled, according to reporting by the Washington Post, fueling speculation within the Defense Department that ground combat soldiers could be sent to the Middle East as the conflict widened. If that happened, if American ground forces were deployed into Iran, it would represent a completely new level of military escalation. The United Nations on Friday demanded swift investigations into Israeli strikes across Lebanon to determine whether they violated international law. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, in a statement on X, said all unlawful attacks in the Middle East and beyond were causing tremendous suffering and harm to civilians throughout the region and posed a grave risk to the global economy, particularly to the most vulnerable people. He said the situation could spiral beyond anyone's control and called for an immediate cessation of fighting and the beginning of serious diplomatic negotiations. That call went unheeded. Europe was being pulled reluctantly into the orbit of the conflict. Britain, France, and Spain had agreed to provide some military support to protect the interests of their allies, although the specific nature of that support was not fully disclosed publicly. Iran, for its part, had warned European countries that they would be considered legitimate targets if they joined on the side of the United States and Israel. NATO allies were, by all accounts in the media, deeply uncomfortable with where this war was heading and how quickly it had spiraled beyond anyone's original predictions. Polls inside the United States showed a deeply divided country, divided along partisan lines, divided by geography, divided by age, divided by economic anxiety over gas prices. Senate Democrats called the strikes reckless and poorly conceived and said they had resulted in what Senator Chuck Schumer described as huge spikes in gas prices. The Senate had already held and failed a war powers vote that would have required Trump to get congressional authorization to continue the strikes, meaning the president retained full authority to continue and expand military operations without any vote from the people's elected representatives. On the ground in Iran, the picture was one of a nation absorbing punishment at a scale unprecedented in modern history, while simultaneously vowing defiance. Thousands of protesters in Tehran showed up after Friday prayers. The IRGC declared readiness. Iran's foreign minister stated publicly that the country was prepared to stand up to a ground invasion if the United States chose to deploy troops. Iranian missiles continued to strike or be intercepted over Gulf states, Israel, Cyprus, and American bases in Iraq and Kuwait, though at a dramatically reduced pace compared to day one, reflecting the devastating effectiveness of the American-led strikes on Iran's launch capabilities. The IDF claimed it had sunk 25 of Iran's battleships, though Trump himself made that claim to CNN, and it was not fully independently verified at that figure. What was verified was the satellite imagery showing widespread destruction at Iranian naval facilities. The big picture was this. 7 days into a war that began with the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, the United States had hit more than 3,000 targets, destroyed 43 Iranian ships, degraded 60% of Iran's missile launch capability, pushed oil to $91 a barrel, evacuated American citizens from across the Middle East, lost 6 soldiers in Kuwait, seen Russia enter the conflict as an intelligence provider for Tehran, watched Lebanon spiral toward humanitarian catastrophe, and had a president who was now officially and publicly on the record demanding not negotiations, not compromise, not a deal, but total, complete, unconditional surrender. White House Chief of Staff said the war was expected to last 4 to 6 more weeks. Iran said it would not surrender. Analysts said anything short of regime collapse would be considered failure. And in the middle of all of it, the global economy held its breath, waiting to find out whether the world's most important oil route would reopen, whether a ground invasion was coming, and whether a war that had already reshaped the Middle East would reshape the entire world. This is the moment we are in. This is day 7 of Operation Epic Fury, and by every available measure, military, diplomatic, economic, geopolitical, the hardest days may still be ahead. What happens in the next 4 to 6 weeks will determine the fate of Iran, the stability of global energy markets, the future of American military commitment in the Middle East, the nature of relations between Washington and Moscow, the trajectory of oil prices that affect every single person who fills up a gas tank or pays a utility bill anywhere on Earth. And the answer to a question no one yet knows: what does it actually look like when a modern nation-state of 87 million people is forced into what one American president, typing in capital letters on a social media platform, called unconditional surrender? We will be watching. We will be reporting. And we will be bringing you the answers in real time, because this story is far from over. Thank you for watching. If you found this report valuable, please share it with someone who needs to understand what is happening right now. Subscribe to this channel for verified, sourced, real-time coverage of the Iran war and every major breaking development around the world. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. This has been a production of our newsroom, and we will see you in the next report.